Alright, you guys, this is your next Q&A. You guys came with some good questions. This is the third part of the running Q&A. Like I always say, if I didn't get you on this one, I'll try to get you on the next one. Let's get straight to it. JC wants to know, how was the interaction between NF and NS on the main line? Do you feel there was any separation between the two that may affect their future? That's a good question, but unfortunately it's one that I have very little knowledge about because my experience on the main lines is very limited. The last time I was on the main line was back in 1991, and even then it was short-stayed and there wasn't any NF members out there. Everyone was still locked up in the SHU, so there wasn't any interaction. If you're asking about the interaction and how it is now, I can only tell you based on what I've heard and what's been conveyed to me. By all accounts, and based on what I've heard from guys like Baby Joker, the interaction is strained and distant. There's no more trust, and instead of the younger Norteños or hermanos coming around seeking education and enlightenment from the C's, they pretty much keep to themselves and stay out of the way. As far as separation that could affect the future, that separation started years ago and has only continued to grow. There's a lot of different ways it could potentially affect the future. It's obvious that people can see some form of separation or some type of breakdown between the C's and N's because they keep asking these type of questions. Since around 1996, things have been on a downward spiral. This is substantiated by the numbers. The number of N's, hermanos, and C's who have either dropped out, walked away, or turned on the O. I think that things have only continued to decline and regress post-Operation Black Widow, following the shift in leadership and after the messy federal and state rift that was aired out openly. Whether people choose to acknowledge it or act like it didn't happen, the reality of it is the younger ends are watching, and it has serious implications on their resolve, on their commitment, on their level of loyalty, and just their overall perception of the O. Conejo and Chuco only contributed to the downward decline of this separation by hijacking leadership, by victimizing a lot of good C's and N's, by setting bad examples of how leaders function on the yard, by acting like renegades, and by openly airing out the organization's internal disparities for everyone to witness. All the forward progress that was made since the mid-60s to date has been lost and relegated. I believe that it's going to take years to fix and repair all the damage that's been inflicted. I also believe that it's going to take a lot of hard work and determination to restore the confidence and faith that was once freely given to the O. So Joe Bananas 415 wants to know, did you take part in kicking the Samoans out 24th when they tried to post up in front of Jack in the Box in the early 90s? I remember when this conflict came to a head. I was actually on 24th and Folsom one night around 94 or 95 when a small skirmish kicked off between the Samoans in my neighborhood. I knew a lot of the Samoans that were involved. Most of them were from Army Street, Hollywood, Cedro, Rambo, and a few others. I walked up with another homeboy named Weasel and posted up on the side of the street where all the homeboys had congregated. The Samoans were on the opposite side of the street and basically squared up with the homies. Besides some of the Samoans that I knew from Army Street, there was also about 4 or 5 Africanos that had also posted up with them as well. I probably could have talked to Hollywood and Cedro and squashed it, but the conflict was already in motion and I never got the chance. Before I could approach them, 2 of the Africanos that were with them pulled out guns and just started shooting at us. These fools literally just started shooting into the crowd. Everybody scattered and took off, but I remember that there was a homegirl that got hit in the ankle and one of the homies got hit in the back. I wasn't strapped up that night, but needless to say, me and Weasel walked a couple blocks down to Snoopy from Hampshire's house and came back with straps. But by then everybody was gone, so we walked down towards Army Street and we just ended up shooting 2 of the first cats from Army Street that were on bikes. As far as I know, this conflict ended up fizzling out and the Samoans didn't push the issue. I went back to the joint on a violation soon after this, but like I said, these guys fell back and it died out. So regular old Joe wants to know, seems hypocritical to try to stop red on red when there is so much infighting amongst the NF and how they knock each other off over personal or opportunistic reasons. Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. How can you take measures to stop the red-on-red conflict on the streets or punish those who engage in it when this same type of red-on-red conflict is being effectuated within the O? That's hypocrisy in the most rawest form. Gang banging on the streets isn't the only form of red-on-red conflict. Infighting, politicking, spreading false or negative propaganda, having ends hit for personal reasons are just a few other ways that red-on-red conflict is effectuated. Unfortunately, these last 20 years has clearly demonstrated just how expedient and how trivial things need to be in order to justify dropping the hammer on its own people. I mean, it's never been a secret that nobody's beyond expendability, that nobody's beyond being expelled from the organization, and that the NF has no qualms about eating one of its own when it comes to money or nefarious politics. So, my boy, the Martin 9400 wants to know, can you see the Renegade C's in the Fed versus state conflict being relegated to cleanup duty for the remainder of their career, or are most of these C's careers unsalvageable for treasonous acts against the familia? I believe that these C's are unsalvageable, not just because of the level of treason that they inflicted upon the O, but also because it would send a very bad, convoluted message to the rest of the O if they were allowed to remain in good standings. These are the type of situations that call for swift and severe examples. Not only that, but the C's in question are so old and are in such bad physical shape that I don't think they'd even be capable of carrying out any type of cleanup. Let's not forget how deep the treason was with regards to these C's. There were multiple good, solid, dedicated, and loyal C's who were hit and victimized behind personal agendas and a treasonous conspiracy between these C's. That in itself is an offense that warrants expulsion. Then there were allegations of serious drug use by these same individuals, and according to numerous ends, these renegades were willing to do just about anything for these drugs, including selling out and more treasonous acts with specific MA members that had adverse effects on several C's. And finally, let's not forget the backbiting, the flagrant disregard, disrespect, and the defamation that was directed at certain high-ranking, well-respected C's. Trust me, although it's not about personal feelings or settling personal conflicts, this won't be forgotten and it's not going to go away. You can't attempt to shame, embarrass, or defame certain C's at the top of the upper echelon and just think that this is going to somehow just go away or be forgotten. So Andres Land wants to know, can an NR member deem a whole hood and then squash with another hood they beef with? No, NR members don't have that kind of authority. Only C's have the authority to deem an entire neighborhood. And even in situations like this, the C's who deem that neighborhood is accountable and better be able to articulate a justifiable reason why they chose to implement such drastic measures. So Eddie Garcia wants to know, how old was the oldest NF member you met? Have you ever run into ex-Mexican Mafia member? The oldest C I personally met or ever ran into was Old Man Rafa from Fresno. At that time, he was in his 60s, and this was in the 90s. So this gives you a sense of how long ago this was. It's been almost 20 years. Back then, Corny, Cuete, Tibbs, Pinky, and Skip were all in their 40s. And this is when Old Man Rafa was still active. Since then, he defected. I believe the oldest active C right now is David D.C. Cervantes from Chino. As far as running into former Mexican Mafia members, yes, I've ran into quite a few of them, Mundo being just one of many. So Don Miguel Gonzalez wants to know, when you were operating in your respective territory, was there knowledge of MA members operating in Northern Cali? What kind of countermeasures were being taken by your former organization in order to reduce MA members from operating up north? Yes, I became aware of a few individuals who I knew were either MA members or strong associates. These individuals were running small-scale operations in some of the areas where we were running street regiments in, but they never posed a threat or interfered with our activities. In these situations, I was advised by leadership to just let them do their thing. Anytime there was any presence or possible presence of the MA operating in any of our territories, I was mandated and required to report this up top first. Unless they posed an immediate threat, then I just smoke them out and get rid of them. This was only in the interest of avoiding unnecessary conflict and to also avoid from interfering with regimental business. So GSP wants to know, in Madeira, there's a lot of paisas slanging up and down, moving big time weight. Are they allowed to move freely? Are they contributing to the O in the same way regular ends are? It all depends on the RC, regimental commander, and how he chooses to establish that area he's operating in. For example, when I was overseeing the Salinas regiment, we had all the paisas contributing kickbacks, meaning they had to pay the regiment a weekly or monthly set quota in order to sell their drugs in our territories. The area in Salinas that's called Chinatown has always been an NF dominated area, but it might be a little more difficult to control the paisas in other areas like Oakland, San Francisco, Richmond, etc., etc. So again, it just depends on the RC, the area that you're establishing, and the mentality out there. So Izzy Fresno wants to know, would you be doing any interviews the way Sandman has been doing some of them? With all due respect to Sandman, he has his own style and his own way of doing interviews, and I have mine. I think these techniques are developed based on our experiences and what we've been through. I think I would have a different way of connecting with certain people that have been to prison because I've been there and can relate to those experiences. On the flip side, Sandman's mentality is also dictated based on his experiences, and his line of questioning clearly reflects this. So in short, I think our styles definitely differ, and I think we have our own unique way of asking questions and conducting interviews either way. So S805M wants to know, Boxer, it would be good if you could do a video on your books after you're done reading it. Give us your thoughts, insight, etc. I appreciate the suggestion, and I absolutely agree with you, but that's kind of already what I'm doing with Inner Demons. The whole purpose behind me doing Inner Demons is because I wanted to elaborate on certain parts of my book that I didn't give a lot of detail to. Not only that, but like I said in the beginning or from the onset, I held back from delving off into certain areas because of the circumstances I was in and because of where I was at. Since I'm no longer in that predicament, I can now speak freely without the threat of reprisal or without having to worry about it having an adverse effect on me or my case. If you're talking about the other books that I read, I'll keep that in mind. So Fernie Sauce, my boy, wants to know, did all the cleaning you did in our cells follow you outside to the outside world? Yeah, Fernie, prison turned me into a compulsive cleaner. I've got OCD, obsessive cleaning disorder, and I've got it bad. In prison, I had gotten so used to cleaning my cell and constantly scrubbing it down that it became obsessive. I scrubbed the walls, the floor, the sink, the toilet, and even the ceiling. Everything had to be perfect or it would bother me. If I used the sink, it had to be wiped out and spotless after. No water residue or soap residue could be left inside. The same thing with the toilet. Because the sink and toilet combination was made out of stainless steel, I'd take some cleanser and a dry rag and buff out small sections to the point where it was so shiny it was almost like a mirror. If I had pictures hanging up, they had to be perfectly straight, otherwise it would bother me. But since I've been home, these old habits have stayed with me and have only gotten worse. Seriously, I'm a clean freak now. Not to the point to where it becomes irritating, but it's definitely because of prison and habits that I picked up from in there. So Juan Hernandez wants to know, what did you do when you first got out of the pen? Did you already have feria and were set, or did you grind it out with some jales and stuff like that? A little bit of both, homie. When I first got out, I had some money put away from an inheritance, but knowing that that wasn't gonna last forever, I eventually got a job. One of the first jobs I got was working inside of a warehouse as a selector. That was back-breaking work, but I stuck it out for about 3 or 4 years. Once I got burnt out on throwing around boxes and loading trucks, I transitioned over to a yard hostler. This was simply moving Class A trucks to and from the dock doors. I'd drop an empty trailer at a door, and then when the warehouse supervisor would radio me to tell me that a truck was full, I'd move it to the yard and then drop another empty trailer. Cakewalk. Once I got tired of doing that, I got into doing deliveries. I started out with Class C box trucks. Yeah, the one that I got into a high-speed chase with, the one that I flipped, and all that other good stuff. But I started out with Class C box trucks and then moved over to Class B and Class A. For guys getting out of prison, these are the industries I'd highly recommend. Because for one, they don't care what you look like. You could be covered with tattoos, and secondly, they're flexible when it comes to your history. Both of these jobs are good, but if you're just coming home and you don't want to have a supervisor breathing down your neck, or you just don't want to be around a lot of people, delivery and driving trucks is the way to go. You're alone, you move more freely, and like I said, you're on the solo tip. So P wants to know, can you do an episode on PTSD? Yeah, I believe I've already done a few things on PTSD and some of the other mental deficiencies that prison causes, but I can drop something else on it. That's always a good topic to discuss because for some of us, these mental issues don't ever subside. The only psychological issues that I think I still haven't been able to shake are some of my old habits and mannerisms, like I've mentioned in a previous question, OCD, obsessive cleaning disorder. I wouldn't say I'm antisocial, but I am a very private person and I don't like people. In fact, I hate people. I hate everyone. I'm kidding. But I am a private type of guy who prefers to avoid big crowds, big events, clubs, big parties, etc., etc. I used to have a lot of anxiety and it used to make me real aggressive, but I think I've learned how to manage this over time. So L Texas wants to know, what was the most brutal hit you did, boxer? Or order, if you can tell us. It was a hit I did on the street. I'll figure out a way to articulate it later on down the line during a future episode of Inner Demons. I'll just say this, it was brutal and it wasn't nothing that I could have carried out in prison. Time, opportunity, and access to real weapons besides tomahawks and bone crushers all contributed to the success and brutality of this hit. I'm not glorifying this either. I'm simply giving you guys the facts and how I was able to get away with it. Enough said. So Frankly Fana wants to know, what would you have done if the corrupt Pelican Bay guard CO tried taking your glasses? It was actually San Quentin, homie. But I'm not trying to sound like a tough guy, but I would have either got my glasses back or I would have picked up an assault on staff, straight up. It's as simple as that. If you ever done time, one thing you know is that the homies are always together, either in groups or in small pairs. That's just how we are. A lot of it has to do with security, but we're usually always paired up whenever there's movement. So, with this in mind, I wouldn't have been able to maintain my good standings with the collective if I would have walked away and allowed that to happen. That would have been a clear act of cowardice. But that's not the only reason why. Whether I had eyes on me or not, I'm just not the type of guy who would let someone take my shit and just walk away with my tail stuck between my legs. CO or not, I would have told that dude to give me my shit back or he would have got rushed, and I would have made sure that I either got the glasses back or they would have gotten broken, so neither one of us could have walked away with them. So NFL News every day wants to know, what do you think about Dubs saying Paradigm, Convicts Collective, and Gunner are comadres for speaking on NF and MA business? Maybe I'm either misinterpreting this or the question somehow got typed up wrong. Because for one, since I've come to know Dubs and his character on YouTube, he's not the type of guy to take these kinds of shots at other channels. The word comadres in Spanish means people who like to gossip, who like to speak too much, or in the worst case scenario, bitches who are always flapping their jibs. Maybe I missed it, or maybe Dubs had one too many Modelos, but in any case, to each his own. Taking Dubs out of the equation, I completely get it that there's some people who don't respect the fact that some of the content creators on YouTube pretty much talk about anything and everything they choose, especially prison politics, because some people just don't respect exposing or talking about the internal workings of that life that they feel should remain behind the walls. Even some of the people who aren't part of that lifestyle anymore, whether they dropped out, got pushed out, or were kicked out, some people still carry some of those same beliefs. And I get that, because at one point in time, I was one of them, and I advocated hard for that belief system. Bottom line, it's a no-no. And even if it was said, I'm not taking it personal. I talked to Dubs, and we support his channel, so it is what it is. So Oscar Rivera wants to know, in regards to in-house politics, is it safer to assume NF politics are more lenient than MA and AB, or what is the right wording? Reason is you hear a lot more, and history shows way more in-house hits between them two. Since EOH, 2 M's have been bodied. A few NF got hit, but seems like they just wanted to get them out of the way, removals. And then, the ultimate head scratcher, Lencho's longevity. Absolutely not. Let me just say this. I'm not saying this because I'm a former NF member or because that was the home team. I don't care about all that stuff anymore. And it's not influencing my answers. But the NF's politics and the way they program are probably the most strictest of all the organizations. Don't base it on the number of murders that have been committed or the statistics. You can't gauge it like that. The NF and the Norteño Collective might be behind on those numbers, but just trust me, they run a program that's so strict and so tight that it actually works against them. This is why there's so many that have fallen into bad standings, and this is why there's been so many who have walked away. Ever since money and power became two of the biggest motivating factors, the O hasn't had any qualms when it's come to being hardlined and heavy-handed with its own people. There used to be a thing called due process and giving a fellow C or a fellow N the benefit of the doubt. But all that went out the window when the O took its vision to the streets. Now it seems like there's no more checks and balances. There's always a rush to judgment when someone's being scrutinized, and leadership would rather drop the hammer on someone opposed to salvaging them when they're drowning. I can't say that I know all the internal workings of the MS, the ABs, or the BGF's political structure. Nor can I say I know how strict they are when it comes to enforcing their own rules, laws, and regulations. I can only go by what I've personally seen and observed during the years when I was doing time. And what I can say in good faith is this. C's, Norteños, and Northerners don't get the same amount of latitude or flexibility from the NF as some of these other groups do from their leadership. The NF runs a tight, zero-tolerance program, and it doesn't take a lot for them to whack one of its own. Like most of these other criminal organizations, they have all preyed on their own people more than they have the opposition. That's just the way it is. The MA, the ABs, the BGF, and the NF have hit more of their own people than they have their opposition. These are the facts. But the NF has taken it to another level. There's supposed to be a level of carnalismo. Putting the O first should literally mean putting your fellow C's or your fellow N's first. But now, money, power, and greed always supersede this. As for the ultimate head scratcher, Lencho's the exception, not the rule. The best way to explain this is just to say that this fool's been slipping through the cracks for years. He's a slimy dude, and a lucky one. Every time he fell under scrutiny, let's just say that all the planets, the stars, and the universe aligned itself in his favor, and he managed to keep skirting by. That's the best analogy I can give, and that's the only way I can explain it when it comes to that dude. So Richie Rich wants to know, can you break down the NF leadership structure? How many members are part of the inner council, general council? Is there only a set number of generals and lieutenants? Let me say this, because I didn't include this in my answer. Yes, there is a certain amount of generals. There's only 3. As far as the IC and the GC, it can be 7, it can be 9, it can be 11, it can be 15. But the numbers will always be odd because these bodies act as a voting system. They have a voting system that they implement whenever it comes to some of the bigger decisions that the O needs to make. So whenever they vote, it has to be an odd number. This way they avoid a tie. Let me try to simplify the rest of this. First, in order to understand the ranking structure, you have to understand the category system. There's 3 separate categories that rank members by experience, personal achievements, and by grade. The CAT system starts from the bottom to the top. With the CAT 1, being the lowest rank. Cat 1 members are C's who are just coming into the O. They are unproven, don't hold any rank or status over anyone else within the O, and their whole objective is to study the NF Constitution, the NF history, and to just absorb as much education during this phase as they possibly can. Cat 2 members are C's who have acquired some seasoning, who know the correct meaning and interpretation of the Constitution, and who can also transition into maestros, teachers, for the Cat 1s. Most Cat 2 members are destined back out to the streets. More than likely, they all have dates and will be appointed to oversee a street regiment. Cat 3 members are C's who are the old spit and shine. This is the management level. These C's are seasoned guerreros. They are proven members who have made an ultimate sacrifice. Most of these C's have been bodied in, meaning they have an identified kill that was carried out for the sole purpose of the O's forward progress. It is from this category that C's are selected and voted in to fulfill other leadership positions, i.e. IC, GC, or one of the HC offices. You cannot acquire status higher than that of a Cat 3. Just because you've been voted in to fulfill a leadership position doesn't mean you're of a higher status. It simply means you've been given additional responsibility. All Cat 3s together collectively act as the O's OGB, organizational governing body. So now, let's get into the delegated leadership positions. At the top of the apex, you have the 3 high offices, which are also known as the 3 generals. Each general has its own individual function. However, they work together in coordination for the O's primary objectives. You have the SRG, which is the Street Regimental General. He oversees the streets, all the street regiments, and he works closely with the GOP, which is the General of Pintas, or prisons. He oversees all the prisons, all the different regimental households, and as I said, he works closely with the SRG to keep track of all the members who are in transit, either coming back in behind the walls or going back out to the streets. Next, you have the GAO, which is the General Advocate's Office. He acts as the O's internal affairs. He oversees all the internal conflicts, the internal investigations. He looks into any allegations of misconduct and any claims of abuse by authority figures. He also administers any disciplinary action for misconduct and admonishes any member who violates any portion of the Constitution. Other than that, you have the NF, the NR, and then of course, the non-affiliated, non-structured street gang Norteños. I hope this quick breakdown answers your question. I hope you guys have enjoyed this Q&A. I know we haven't dropped as much content as we usually do, but as you all know, these last few weeks have been full of distractions and interference. But I can assure all of you that we will be getting back on track and that we'll be going hard these next couple of weeks. I'll be getting back on the Inner Demons episode by either today or tomorrow at the latest, so be looking out for that. We'll also be dropping a lot more profiles, phone calls, more Q&As, and a variety of other content, so just bear with us. Just continue dropping your questions in the comment sections and we'll find them. Also, if you're not a subscriber to our other channel, Paradigm Entertainment Productions, please help us out by subscribing. We haven't dropped any content on that channel for a while, but we'll be revamping that channel and dropping a lot more current content on it as well. The same goes with our Patreon. I take full responsibility for allowing this to happen, but again, I assure you that this will be corrected. With that said, we want to continue extending our appreciation and gratitude to all those of you who continue supporting us. We appreciate the support, the suggestions, the constructive criticism, the ideas, and all the feedback, the positive feedback you guys have been giving us. Also, we want to send special shout outs to the Homie Hangout, Gunners Collective, the Rojo Room, OG, Triple OG, and all those other channels who showed their support and solidarity following the minor distraction we had this past week. Some of you stepped up and showed some genuine character, and for that, we appreciate you. With that said, I'll close this up by saying what we always do in our closings. We appreciate all of you, the viewers, each and every one of you, because without your support, we would cease to exist.